Hi, Denise. It's 1 o'clock. Did you want to get started, or do you want to give another minute or two?
Nope, I think let's get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'd like to welcome everyone today to the Eastern Transportation Coalition's Changing World of Optimal Traffic Monitoring web meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping items to go through before we get started. All the participants are in listen-only mode. You can use the audio either through your computer or through your phone. Number 719-867-1571. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Justin, questions on the audio or the web. If you're having audio questions, you can also press *0 to speak to an operator. This web meeting is being recorded. Presentations will be posted to the Coalition's website, and everyone that has registered or participated for the event today will receive a follow-up mailer with the links to those documents and recording. Since all our participants are in listen-only mode, we're going to use the chat box to ask questions today. Just simply type your question into the chat box, and they will either be answered at the end of the presentation or at the end of the meeting, or they may be answered by your presenter during the course of the web meeting today. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Denise Marco. She's the TSMO Program Director for the Eastern Transportation Coalition. Denise?
Thanks, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, super. All right. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to a good conversation about optimal traffic monitoring today. Let me go to the next slide briefly. So here's the agenda. After the introductions and after a bit of the welcome, Stan Young, who many of you are familiar with or should be familiar with, is from the NREL Lab, Advanced Transportation and Urban Scientist. He's going to start us off with a brief discussion or a summary of some of the work that the Coalition has been doing along with Stan on optimal traffic monitoring strategies. We're then going to move to Michael Pack, who is the director of the CATT Lab, and he is going to be discussing new traffic monitoring and decision-making opportunities. Originally, when the webinar was first put together, Bob McQueen was to be the second presenter to talk about some of the work that he's doing with guidelines and the development of guidelines for traffic monitoring. Unfortunately, he had a family issue and is currently on a plane heading over the Atlantic to London. And so Michael was gracious enough to step in, take some of his slides, take some of his own slides, and put them together into a meaningful presentation. Once Michael is done, we're going to go back to Stan, who is then going to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 mobility impacts and what's being done in that area, and then we'll wrap up with some final questions. Please note that you can use the chat box for questions. We will monitor it as we walk through it and stop the speakers at the end of each presentation and discuss anything you might have there. Okay, so we have a lot of states that were registered today. We've got DOTs, Turnpike authorities, MPOs, federal agencies, universities, vendors, and consultants. So there's a whole group of you on the line. Again, please don't hesitate to put a question in the chat box should it arise. It's quite a complement of people. And then, of course, before we get started, we always talk a little bit about what the coalition who sponsors these webinars is doing. Recently, we had in November and then just recently in December, we've had two great meetings. One of them had to do with a traveler information web roundtable. It was facilitated by Kelly Wells of North Carolina, Mary Amin from the New Jersey Turnpike Authority. And the states really went around and talked about some of the new things and standard, even some of the standard programs they have for traveler information, who's doing what. So it was a good way to gather information and exchange ideas, what you're doing in the world of traveler information. And then, as you know, we are in the process of writing an RFP for a new traffic data marketplace. So we had meetings with our state selection committee or steering committee, I should say, and then we had a second meeting with our vendors. We have released an RFI, request for information. We're asking for recommendations and comments back on that by December 22nd. If any of you are interested in taking a look at that, it's on the Coalition website. You can go to the TSMO section and then to the VPP section, and there is a link there where you can actually select that. There's 6 different types of data sets we're looking to procure. This is no longer going to be a probe data marketplace, but we're trying to build it into a data marketplace. So those meetings took place December 1st and 2nd. Upcoming, we have 3 events upcoming that are in the works and being planned. One's a TVIR is a tolling violation reciprocity working group. They're looking at tolling apps. That's going to be held December 15th. We have a hurricane pilot. We're doing the seven southeastern states we're doing a pilot study with WEJO connected vehicle data and a Moonshadow analytics platform. The final results of that pilot will be on, we'll showcase that on January 28th. And then again, the next user group meeting will be on February 4th. So I'm sorry, a lot to take in there, but again, we're trying to keep you apprised of everything that's going on. So here are our 2 speakers today. I'm not sure I need to say too much about them. Dan Young, who is the Advanced Transportation Urban Scientist. He's at NREL. He currently serves as a DOE technologist in the city for the Columbus Smart City program. He's also what we call an urban science pillar because he leads the DOE systems and modeling for, again, accelerated research and transportation initiatives. So again, really steeped in the DOE. And then secondly, we're going to have Michael Pack. He's got more than 20 years of experience working in information transportation industries. He's the director of CATT. I don't think he needs much more of an introduction. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with him. So those are our 2 speakers today. With that being, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. I'm hoping somebody can be muted. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Stan. Stan, are you there to talk about optimal traffic monitoring?
Yes, thank you, Denise. I have the con now. Greetings, everyone, coming to you from Denver, Colorado. So good to see everyone. I have 2 topics today. The primary one is optimal traffic monitoring strategies, and as it turned out, we wrote this mainly 1 or 2 years ago, and as it turned out, that the COVID crisis really poured the gasoline and accelerated a lot of the trends that we were talking about. So we kind of married them. I'm going to first talk about the product that the coalition developed, the Optimal Traffic Monitoring Guide. It was authored in 2018 and 19, and I want to do a shout out to Justin Ferry and Karen Jahanian. Both had large input in this as well as many others who reviewed it in the coalition. And we tried to capture the best practice of using emerging traffic data technology for road jurisdictions. Really, the state of the practice for planning operations and performance measures with respect to new data sources. It was published in late 2019. We had planned for webinars and presentations in early 2020, and then COVID hit. So this is in some ways a delayed 6 to 9 month rolling out of what this guide was. Then if we have time, we're going to break, and Michael is going to bring some of the exciting new data sources and what's going on there. And then if time allows, NREL has done quite a bit of work in monitoring COVID-19 mobility impacts. It's material you've likely seen before from other places, but also commentary on where this data comes from and how it meshes in with some of the trends identified in the monitoring guide. This is what the monitoring guide looks like. Again, September 2019 was the publishing date. You can get a copy off of the Eastern Transportation Coalition's website. It was created by the Eastern Transportation with funding from an MCOMP2 grant, and we were happy to get this all together and released. It's intended to raise the awareness of viable traffic monitoring sources that have emerged over the past decade. By recent, we're not meaning the last 12 months, 18 months. What we're talking about is a general trend that the technologies have matured and people should be aware of them and plug into them as appropriate. Of course, the target audience is practitioners ranging from engineers, planners, and managers at the state, county, and MPO and city level. We tried to put emphasis on applications and not just talk about the technology, and we'll show a little bit of that in the upcoming slides. Kind of the overall, mission statement in this new age of data and communications, we've opened up new avenues of traffic monitoring. Even though automated vehicles seem to get the spotlight, there's really been a ground shift on how we manage with traffic data. How do DOTs optimally leverage this new data? How do they combine it with traditional data sources? to accomplish their mission. That's a discussion we hope to have evoked in this, and we're going to go over today. Kind of the background principles. As I said, traffic data and information has undergone a revolution, and it doesn't get enough spotlight, but it should, and we hope to put the spotlight on it here. Third-party sources. This is kind of unusual for the long-timers. 20, 30 years ago, any knowledge on traffic was produced by public sources. That's almost flipped. The private sources of data these days have rivaled or surpassed what the road jurisdictions can collect at many places. At the root of this, of course, are vehicles and cell phone that self-report location and speed primarily. It's not the only source of the root of this revolution, but responsible for much of it. The main benefits of these new data sources is we call it scalability. They can see the whole network at once, all locations and at all times, and summarize it up. People say, is it more accurate than a sensor? No, it is not, but it's much more scalable. And because of this, they can bring this data at price points that are enabling completely new applications. Some we haven't dreamed of, but some we have dreamed of, but said it would be too expensive. And it's fun to watch all these roll out, how we can monitor construction zones and other things so much better now than we could 10 years ago. Combining the old and the new, one of our messages, don't throw out the old. It has its place still, but when you marry the two together appropriately, a lot of good things come out of it. If you take a look at the organization, and these are just snapshots out of some of the graphics, we cover 4 areas. First, conventional sensors, a tip of the hat to that they've been the workhorses and will continue to have a place. Then we'll look at commercial probe traffic data. We'll look at re-identification data, high-resolution controller data, which is primarily the domain of the traffic engineers, but everyone should be aware of what it is and what it brings to the whole community. And lastly, we look at emerging leading edge technologies, which ironically, we wrote that and then COVID hit, and a lot of these emerging leading edge technologies that were accelerated tremendously and already in place and being used by many organizations. The first one is traditional conventional sensors, kind of laying the groundwork. Still needed and viable. We're not here preaching that you need to get rid of them. Justified on critical portions of the roadway. In many cases, it provides the reference data to calibrate and validate these new industry trajectory sources of data. I can point to numerous instances of that. Fully owned and operated by the agency. This is both a blessing and a curse. The curse is the financial burden is on the agency to keep these up. The blessing is as you don't have to navigate data licensing and other data issues related to licensing data. It's simply owned by the agency, which it should not be overlooked. That is a great asset. The properties, it's expensive, requires maintenance, as we said. Not really spatially scalable. You only get data wherever you can afford to install or deem where the sensors are justified. They do give you 24/7, 365 if maintained properly, but only at a single location. So kind of after laying the groundwork there, saying where are they still justified, where are you going to need them, kind of reinforcing that we're not going to sweep out the old. Accurate reference volume data for highway performance monitoring system, HPMS, that will continue to be the stable of good sensor data. High volume critical corridors, where if there's a gap in outsourced data or you need redundant coverage, it's definitely needed. I think we're kind of getting into the area now. I was talking with Kelly Wells from North Carolina. When using these vendor-provided data sources and they become embedded in many of the business processes, you got to stop and ask yourself how vulnerable you are if that data has an outage or a gap. In many cases, if you're in real-time operations, do take that into account if you're using it to control actuators or control traffic in some sense. Enforcement and safety critical activities, of course, this really comes in if you have to have full control over its accuracy and full control over what the data is used for. Owning that equipment and operating that equipment, of course, has a huge advantage. The next data source is all about commercial probe data. It goes by various names, but this is basically vendors that the I-95 Corridor Coalition has invited into its vehicle probe project. Back in 2014, it included NREL here and TomTom. There's other sources of it these days, but it's basically we want to say if you're not using it and you're not plugged into it, you're likely behind, whether you're a city, state, MPO, or other. Most people understand that now. Those who have used it and used it for 4 or 5 years understand that this data opens up new business processes, simplifies businesses, decisions, performance measures, things like that. And before you know it, once you've had the access to such data for 4 or 5 years, the spider web of things that it begins to influence is quite amazing. They all operate by tracking a sample or a subset of travelers or vehicles out there, and it's a significant value proposition for any application. Knowing 5 to 10% of the vehicle behavior or the traveler behavior allows for accurate inferences of travel time, congestion, bottlenecks, and assessment of user cost. And those are 4 areas. They've been extended to many other areas as well, but it provides good visibility across your entire network in those categories. Personnel and DOT should be well versed in this, understanding both the industry and what its value proposition is, and to some extent the technical details behind it. More or less, you have to understand the technology enough to understand what should and could and should work well versus areas that it may be challenged. Apps. Travel times on sign, the killer app in 2008. In fact, I'm going to go ahead. There's a great story behind this one. I got a picture in the upper right-hand corner. This is the overhead message sign in Maryland on a section of the Beltway. Better, faster, cheaper is definitely where it came in. Maryland was approaching a statewide 511 system, meaning travel time on signs, but also the electronic one, and we're estimating the cost of building out enough sensors back in 2006 through 2008. The probe outsourced traffic data came along, and they said, if this works, we're going to build it better, faster, and cheaper, and it did. They were able to roll it out sooner than expected at much less cost and much more scalable, and had a lot of good feedback on that. You'll see it also in traffic management centers across the states. There's a picture of the Florida District 4. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see a color-coded map, green, red, so forth. Everyone's becoming accustomed to that with a lot of the smartphone apps. But this is a staple now in any traffic management center to provide that overall kind of context so that when they see things occur, they can see the traffic slowdowns, they can direct their CCTVs to it. So that is really where it took root. It's now being applied to many other things. Smart work zones, a lot of the recent apps that have been rolling out, travel time delay, queue detection, dynamic lane merging, so forth and so on. It's really brought another tool to the table. Those are a safety critical area, and anything we can do to save lives is very, very appreciated. You can't mention this without mentioning performance measures, performance measures, performance measures. There's a lot of acronyms in that lower right hand, whether it's peak hour, excessive delay, level of travel time reliability, so forth and so on. I would have to go back to the books and reacquaint myself. NPM RDS quickly followed on after a lot of this began to emerging, like particularly within the coalition. Now we have MAP 21 performance measures that are all keyed off of what we call travel time trajectory data. I saw a note coming in saying, can this be very large? Yes, it can. These are not spreadsheet applications. I'm just talking about travel time and speed. We'll get in and talk a little bit about the actual trajectory data when we get latitude and longitude, which adds another whole dimension on top of it. But just the bread and butter of travel time and speed has been a game changer over the last decade and has really brought a lot of great applications to the table for road jurisdictions. The next area is re-identification data. This is being able, I call it an inherent travel time sensor. You can do this if you want to put a GPS device in your car and run the roadways, or a stopwatch, or if you can do it with license plate matching. But what really brought it to the forefront is the ability to do it with consumer electronics, specifically Bluetooth, but later Wi-Fi. It allows DOTs to anonymously sample travel times and origin and destinations. It has to do with what they call MAC IDs, which I call digital license plates. Some nice things about it: there's no master database to track a MAC ID back to its owner, which really helps with personal privacy. As I said, I tell people to think of it as inherent travel time sensors. You have to deploy equipment, and you have to put something out there to receive these wireless transmissions. They tend to be less expensive than other sensors, but you pass an upstream sensor and then a downstream sensor, and then you get an inherent measurement of what's going on. The number of vehicles sampled tends to vary anywhere from 3, 4, 5% to up to 20%, depending on how you implement it. Applications, of course, include OD studies. Corridor signal timing is critical. It's been a great boon there. Calibration of other travel time systems. It's kind of ironic. One of the first applications of re-identification data was to calibrate travel time data from industry probe sources, since it's based on GPS and the extreme precision both in space and in time. It has very little calibration. I mean, you can screw it up by putting the sensor in the wrong place, but the equipment itself tends to be digital and work on its own. And also, it still continues to be justified in mission-critical corridors where sensorization is needed. Here's a couple of examples of the application. On the lower left is a before-after study, one of the first ones I am aware of that Maryland performed just north of Baltimore. The blue is the before, the red is the after, and this is a travel time histogram, so if it shifts to the left as it did, that means things improved. But the emphasis is here with this much travel time data, you can capture not just the central tendency or the mean or the median, you can really begin to look at the distribution of travel times across any facility. This is emphasized on the right. One of the hardest things that the University of Maryland and the coalition had to do was validate vehicle probe data on busy signalized arterials. Busy signalized arterials has a lot of stop and go traffic, a lot of, a portion of it gets stopped on red while a portion goes through on green, and understanding that and understanding the distribution is one of the things that Bluetooth re-identification, or now Wi-Fi re-identification, is excellent at doing. This is a trace from the validation program, and you can see not only the central tendency in black, but the dispersion about that as a result of the signalized operations. So it's been a boon in understanding traffic signalized arterials, but anywhere where travel time is critical and difficult to measure. Next, kind of hand in hand, these all kind of emerged on the same time. High resolution controller data. It's not my favorite title, but it accurately describes it. It unleashes the data in the traffic signal cabinet. It's always been there, signal phase and timing, all actuations from the sensor data. But digital communications became low cost enough, and server-side storage and processing became ubiquitous and available, and so now the data from these cabinets are flowing into a central source, being recorded and being analyzed. This went hand in hand. Now that we have the data, we had a thing developed, led by Purdue University, Darcy Bullock, and his many talented grad students there, called Automated Traffic Signal Performance Measures, or ATSPMs. Now that we have all this high-resolution controller data, can we do a better job characterizing the performance at traffic signals, more than just the A, B, C, and D that we've long done, but get more precision in it? How well do the cues progress from signal to signal? Are there any signal failures where you get stuck at a red light and have to wait for the next cycle? Things like that. This is all leading. This was all established about a decade ago, and now the concepts, not just ASTPMs, but many of the more detailed performance measures needed to both recognize problems at signals but also to cure them, are being mined not only from this high-resolution controller data, but some of those concepts are now being applied to some vehicle trajectory data that we'll discuss. Here's an example of how well this is caught on in the lower right-hand corner. This is a Purdue coordination diagram. If you're a traffic engineer, you'll probably recognize it immediately. But this is a way to look at signals in depth on one chart for a given day and see what's going on. Been excellent. The map on the left is a map that pulled off of US DOT, and it's about how much this high-resolution controller data and the associated ATSPMs have been, the pace that they've been adopted by various states. And you see just in a short matter of about a decade, it's reached quite a large prevalence. So, I mean, not only do traffic engineers need to know about this, but anyone in the planning and operations in general. understand that this data is becoming increasingly available. I would wager, just my opinion, that anyone who is upgrading the traffic signal control system will have this as a data feed from here on out. Emerging technologies. This is kind of ironic because this was all authored in late 2019, and now many of these emerging technologies have been accelerated tremendously by the COVID effort. Trajectory data, I've referred to this a couple of times. Probe data typically in the lexicon we use means travel time and speed. Trajectory data is, can we actually get a hold of the geodetic latitude, longitude, and get the breadcrumb trail of where vehicles have been. This is increasingly becoming available from multiple vendors, enabling a lot of high-resolution analysis. One of the things that we use it for, of course, is origin destination studies. How do people travel? So we can build it in and build better models. As I mentioned before, we're getting sensorless ATSPMs. That was the big topic at 2020 TRB. That was in research and starting to see evidence of products being on the market that can take it nationwide. And in 2020, of course, COVID hit, and the ability to have, whether you call it trajectory data, sometimes the cell phone version of it is location-based data. It brought visibility that was highly needed for COVID-19, and I got a few snapshots on that I'll share at the end of the presentation if time allows. That this trajectory data and what we're going to talk about volumes, we are anticipating it in a 2 to 3 year time frame, and I think the COVID and some of the needs of the COVID accelerated the market tremendously. Volumes from probe data, there's 2 dimensions of traffic. There's speed and travel time is one, and then there's volume data. The density and scale of what we've called waypoint data is now leading to volume data services. Can we see enough samples of vehicles on the roadway that we could scale it up? We were anticipating this in 2018 and 19, and then when 2020 hit and COVID, many of the people who had this, we're not getting precise volume, absolute volume, but they took January and February saying these are the number of probes we saw on the road and compared it to March, April, May, June, July, and got you a percentage, really pointing to this is about to emerge, and we hope to capture it in the Coalition's traffic data marketplace. The Coalition is currently running a hurricane evacuation volume estimation proof of concept. That's a big long name, but we more or less, we would like the volume data, we'd like it in real time. Some of these trajectory data services are beginning to provide it in real time, and so we did a little proof of concept to see if we were to architect it, where would it work? Could we prove out the issues and identify them before going into a full-fledged development process? And that's been very interesting, and we'll be presenting on that in late January. Well, thank you for your time. I am going to pause now and turn it over to Michael Pack, who always has exciting new stuff to share. And then at the end, if there's time, show a few snapshots from the COVID analysis.
Dan, before you turn it to Michael, just one comment for the group. In the chat box, there is a link to the what we call the one-page traffic monitoring brief. It basically has each of those graphic pictures of the types of technology on one page. It was built and created for executive level management. And so we presented that to the executive board as an option to say, by the way, this is what it's all about. And then, by the way, go see your traffic engineers if you have questions. So just want to put it out there that if you haven't seen it, it's on the web. It's a one-page download. It's very, very easy to read. As Stan, it's very easy to listen to and understand, but it's in the chat box if you want to download it. Okay. So Stan, thank you. With that, I'm going to head back. Michael, are you there?
Do you want to, Denise, this is
Joanna,
do you want to take a look? Does Stan want to? There's one question for Stan in the chat box.
He answered that earlier.
Oh, okay. Second. And just a comment, that link will take you to the page, so it also has the full report. So you can either get the short version or the long version of what Stan just went through. Okay,
there's a question about sample sizes. I think I addressed the big data. Sample sizes used to be highly protected from vendor to vendor because it was critical, but sample sizes are growing pretty huge these days, and so I've noticed that they've been more freely shared. Definitely there is no industry standard of what sample size is, so you have to read the fine print with each vendor or test it yourself. So fully acknowledge that, Rashid.
Hey, this is Michael Pack here. We've also noticed that not with the traditional probe data vendors, but with some of the new location-based services providers, you have to be careful with interpreting, like Stan said, the fine print. If someone says they cover, 50% of all the travelers in the United States, well, what does that really mean? Does it mean 50% of every single minute of every single day, or 50% of all the people in the United States had some sort of ping over the last 6 months? The vendors sometimes fudge the numbers a little bit to sound a little more impressive than they are. But that's less the data providers that we deal with on a regular basis and more some of the emerging location-based services folks. Should I keep going?
Yep, sounds good, Michael. Go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about some new traffic monitoring opportunities and focusing on those that could hopefully help us to make some decisions in the future. I'll first start off by talking about the traffic monitoring guide, which I've put a link to in the chat box there. So the traffic monitoring guide was last updated back in 2016, and the guide provides what was then current guidance to state highway agencies for traffic monitoring, including like policies, standards, procedures, and equipment. Now, it still focuses quite a lot on volume and classification data, with speeds now also included with the 2016 update. But it's really important that the guidance that is given reflect current data center capabilities and current trends in the marketplace. So an update to the 2016 guide is being developed right now by the consulting team shown on this slide. And since that last 2016 update, there have been significant changes in these data sources, including availability of new forms of probe vehicle data, new data center technologies, new business models for data collection analysis, and the advent of smart data management solutions that enable data to be converted to information from which new knowledge can be extracted. So that's really the basis for this new response strategy and the management techniques for transportation that's going into this update that's being worked on right now. So Chapter 6 of this guide is going to cover the acquisition of third-party traffic data, new technologies, and data analysis. And there are really 6 main categories that are going to be explained in this particular chapter. And those include emerging data acquisition collection options, purchasing data, both opportunities and challenges associated with that, use cases for actually doing something with the data, which I think is the most important thing, and then data acquisition, collection planning, smart data management, and purpose-driven data collection. Now, emerging data acquisition and collection options include data from connected and autonomous vehicles, and this is expected to be a huge volume of data compared to what most folks are used to working with now, and the source of a fairly significant sample of near real-time data, including vehicle identification, or trip origin, ultimate destination, even current location, and instantaneous vehicle speed data. So that is an additional rich source of data available from the vehicle from the automobile area network, including parameters that describe the operation of the vehicle and the behavior of the driver. These are all exciting things that are going to be covered in this new Chapter 6. Now, I don't honestly know yet when this is going to be published. It takes a while to get things through the review cycle process, but it could be as early as next year. But what I want to do is go over some additional resources that are published and available now or are going to be available really soon. The first is something called Considerations of Current and Emerging Transportation Management Centered Data. This is a document that was put together by Leidos, and I helped write some of this last year. And this was funded by the TMC Pooled Fund Study. Within this document, there are 14 newish data sources that are covered. I say newish because, you know, it's about a year old now, and the new data sources are constantly evolving and coming to bear. I still think it's a relevant document, though. So it's got a list of different data providers and where they're getting their data. It also has applications of data shown at a fairly high level. And when you get the slides, there will be a link that you can find this document, and as I finish the presentation, I'll start to post some of those links in a chat box for you as well. There's another document, an NCHRP Research Report 920. This is for the management and use of data for transportation performance management guide, a guide for practitioners. So this is really performance management focused, but it's still relevant to real-time operations and ops in general. And as part of this report, there are 11 different use cases that we call vignettes that show real-world examples of how agencies are working with and managing their data. And as part of this report, there are 6 different stages of managing and using data that are laid out. It's an interesting report, and I think it's fairly well written. And again, I will post a link to it in the chat box at the end of my presentation. So there's a lot of discuss about data and all the cool new data sets that are coming available, but we don't always focus as much on the applications and how to work this stuff into our planning processes and our daily ops. So there's a new report that's in the review process with NCHRP right now, Synthesis 2005, topic 5106, and it's called State DOT Use of Vehicle Probe and Cellular GPS Data. So this is going to include 19 short use case write-ups from DOTs up and down the coalition, the corridor, but also on the West Coast and Middle America as well. 12 of these use cases are going to cover speed-related data, but 7 of the 19 use cases are going to cover location-based services and or some sort of people movement data from connected vehicles, OEMs, or location-based service providers. So that's coming out soon, but there are some other platforms and applications that the CATT Lab's been working on that are trying to make use of some of this new data as well. And one of them is a project that I've been working on with Stan and his crew for the last couple of years now. And it really gets down to not just monitoring speed data and volumes, but monitoring the climate and emissions and driver behavior. So this 2-year project is funded by the Department of Energy. Again, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the CATT Lab were doing the bulk of the technical work. Our partners were MORPC, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments in D.C. And from those 2 agencies, or those 2 groups, we were able to take probe-based speed data and marry that with vehicle registration data. So, you know, what types of vehicles are out on the road? What type of engine do they have in them? What's their emissions data from those vehicles? And we're able to build real-time and predictive energy usage, emissions, fuel consumption, and other types of models and visuals of vehicle ownership. So you can literally go in to this application and you can choose a road or a county or a state, and the system will pop out a list of variables that tell you each road, how much energy usage, CO2 emissions, NOx emissions, and other relevant metrics. So it's a different way to think about evaluating the performance of your roadway and monitoring what's going on out there. We have an energy use and emission matrix where, again, you can choose a road and different vehicle types, and it'll give you all sorts of measures about those energy usage models and different emissions. And you can even draw maps. Instead of a speed map, you can draw an energy use map or an emissions map and show which roads might be contributing more to emissions and other issues related to emissions. And then you can go and break down your roads in your state. Say, okay, well, the interstates in my jurisdiction, how much of the emissions and energy usage out there is related to interstate travel versus U.S. routes, turnpikes, state routes, expressways, and so on and so forth, and being able to break down the statistics for all of that. And you can even go in and choose different years and look at the breakdown for a particular region, whether that's again a zip code or a county or a state, and see the breakdown of vehicle ownership. So how many of those are hybrid versus plug-in electric or leaded or unleaded types of vehicles. In addition to that work, the coalition is working on a neat project to go in and actually evaluate the causes of highway congestion. So I think we're all familiar with the causes of congestion pie chart. It's been around for like 14 or 15 years now. That says about 50 some odd % of all the congestion on the roadway is due to non-recurring issues. The problem with that pie chart is it was built off of model data, and it's one pie chart for the entire country. So what the coalition is doing with the CATT Lab is going in and making this very, very region specific and using actual data from the probe data vendors, from national incident data sources, from national signal databases and weather data. And we're going out and integrating all this data, again, incident signal locations, weather, work zones, special events. We're determining if there's congestion out there. If so, what could be the potential cause, and then outputting that in a visual on our website that will show you, again, the national congestion, but also break it down to the state level. And we're going to go beyond that and look at the county level causes of congestion as well for at least the national highway system routes. And this will be available month by month or for the entire year. And we're going to start off by looking at calendar year 2019, given that 2020 has not quite been what we all expected it to be. So that's in progress right now and should be wrapping up in another 6 months or so. But there's also lots of cool and innovative applications that we can do now with this location-based services data or data directly from OEMs or connected vehicle data. And all of these are, I think, really going to be changing the way we monitor and look at traffic data. So the University of Maryland has its own platform where it's going out and using location-based data, and it's able to go in and figure out in any city in the country, how many trips are being taken by people. And of those trips, how many of them are driving trips versus air trips versus rail versus bus versus biking and walking. And using that data, we're going out and we're marrying that with COVID data. So where are people getting COVID down to the county level and all around the world, and we're producing visuals that get down to at least the county level data that look at, for every county in the United States, how many people are getting in their vehicle or getting on a transit vehicle every day and traveling someplace. And if they're traveling someplace, how far are they traveling? Are they going across a county border? Are they staying at home? what is it that they're doing? What's the nature of their travel? Is it a work trip or is it a leisure trip? And we've been using this data to develop this platform, our COVID-19 impact analysis platform, that lets you go in and look at all these different mobility metrics and marry those with social demographic data and even economic data as well. But then we're also using this to provide additional stats out to the U.S. DOT Bureau of Transportation statistics, which includes things like in every county in the country, how many trips are being taken each day that are under a mile versus 1 to 3 miles or 3 to 5 miles or 5 to 10 miles and so on and so forth, all the way up to 500 plus mile trips. You can go to US DOT's BTS website and download this, this information, the raw data behind this to do your own thing with it if you want. That's all being derived by location-based services data, but we're also working with other third-party data providers to give people a sense of where people are driving and if they're crossing a particular stretch of roadway at a particular time of day or day of week, where are they coming from? Where did they start their trip before they drove across that little stretch of roadway? Or after they drove across that stretch of roadway, where did they then go to? What was the end of their destination? And there's all sorts of filtering opportunities there. But I think what's particularly cool about this is there are some actual operations use cases here. So imagine that you are a DOT that is responding to a major crash on the roadway that is blocking all of the lanes on a particular major interstate. And you're now scrambling and you're trying to tell people where to detour to get around that particular incident. And you want to know how well are your communication strategies for getting the word out to people, and are people actually following your detouring recommendations? And using this data, this TRIPS data, you can actually plot where the incident is and which routes people are taking to get around the incident. And then you can use that to plan your response to future incidents or change your communication strategies to get the word out to people. And there's all sorts of other things that you can do, both in real time or for after action reviews and analysis and planning. There's some really cool things there. But these types of data are also making it easier to deploy some of the cool technologies that used to require lots of infrastructure. Stan Young was just talking about high-resolution controller data, which can lead agencies to ATSPM measures, automated traffic signal performance measures. This can be an expensive thing for many agencies to deploy, but with the advent of high-frequency ping data from these commercial data providers, you can now go out and start to approximate ATSPM measures and understand the percent arrival on green, the number of stopped vehicles at an interchange, the average travel time to get through a corridor, or the average wait time at an intersection, the percent of people turning right, the percent of people turning left, the percent of people going straight. There's all sorts of performance measures that you can get from these intersections now without having to install a single thing down on the roadway, which I think is pretty cool and is going to innovate the way we manage traffic moving forward. So those are some initial applications for individual data sources, but I think what we really need to be getting towards is merging all these different disparate data sources, not just looking at probe data or location-based services by itself, but how can you marry all these things together? So we've been working with the Maryland Department of Transportation to go in and try to link all the different modes together to show you in a dashboard whether or not there's a crash on a particular roadway, and if it's a crash, how is it impacting the other modes? Is it just affecting vehicular traffic, or is it affecting people that are trying to get to an airport? Or is it affecting transit? And so looking at your transit systems and understanding that 21% of your buses right now are operating early, 37% are operating late, and the rest are on time or out of service, and seeing if there's any crashes that are impacting different lines, and if so, by how much. Doing the same thing for your rail as well. I think what's really cool is then going to the airports and saying, okay, well, here's what things look like at a particular airport. Here's the runways that are open. Here's the passenger waiting times. And oh, by the way, there's a major crash leading to the airport, which means that the travel time index is worse than it would normally be on a particular roadway. And as people struggle to get to the airport, they might also have issues with parking because now the express parking is completely jammed up. And there's a weather advisory and so on and so forth. And doing the same thing, not just with your airports, but your seaports as well. Looking at the monitoring of traffic leading up to a port, the vehicular traffic for freight going to pick up cargo, looking at the water traffic, how many vessels are waiting to dock, how many are docked, how many are leaving, what's the turn time, what's the queue time at each seaport. And being able to merge all these things together so that we can get a more comprehensive picture of what's going on our road network. So tying this all together, we tend to talk a lot about data, but we get really excited about data, but we don't really focus as much on the systems and how to integrate this data back into our ATMS platforms. We've got so many disparate systems, and you think about a poor operator. If you buy a system from one vendor and another system from another vendor, and they've got their ATMS and they've got some other lane closure permitting system, eventually you've got an operator that's got 50 different screens and 50 different applications in front of him or her, and they just get overloaded. They don't know which screen to look at. They don't know what to focus on. So we're not really focusing as much on human factors for the people managing the systems as we really should be. I think we need to be focusing more on integration. How can we take the data and the application areas that we're interested in and merge them into our existing processes, our existing workflow, so that we don't have just a million different separate systems out there. And also, when we do this, you know, there's 50 states, there's way more than 50 traffic management centers out there. We shouldn't all be doing this in a vacuum on our own. We all have similar needs, so why aren't we sharing our resources to try to develop these interesting applications together and integrating them back into our workflow as opposed to each of us doing it independently? And I think that's really where the coalition comes into play. They're trying to at least lead the conversation and try to get people to think of these things, try to develop, co-develop at least. So I guess my leaving thought would be, as you're looking at new data and new systems, try to reimagine your ATMS and think about how you can bring some of this back into the fold and not just invest in the data source by itself, but think longer term. With that, I think that is the end of my presentation. Again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to drop links to those documents I was talking about earlier in the chat window. If you just give me a few minutes.
Great. Now, Michael, thank you. Michael, there are a couple questions in the chat box as well. Arun is asking you if the energy use emission tool, is that available to all current RITA subscribers? That's just for the first
So the answer is both yes. The answer is yes, yes, and no. The system is actually getting deployed tomorrow night, so it's not available to anyone yet. When it is deployed, anyone with RITIS and Pro Data Analytics Suite subscription will be able to see it. However, it requires that vehicle registration data, and for this DOE pilot, we only got that for MORPC in Ohio and NWCOG, the National Capital Region. So you can play with it, but it's only going to be available for those two geographies.
Okay. That's a start. That's great, though. That's a start for people to see how it can be used and how it does work. To answer Richard, the next question in the box, Richard's question, yes, Richard, if you are on our registration or attendee list with your email, everyone will get an email notification about a link to get to these presentations. So yes, that'll be out there for you. Michael, Eric Hill asked about what about non-vehicular trips like ped bikes?
So we, at least for our COVID platform, we are looking at slow and short trips is what we call them. So breaking out the bike and pedestrian data from the vehicular trips, it is a little hard for us today to separate bike and ped independently. We're still working on algorithms that will do that. So right now it's bike and ped together as one. But we're seeing if we can do more with that. We're just still in the early phases. Okay,
great, thank you. And I saw Bert's comment too, as well as the cost. And again, I think I think it's all relevant to your state and to your state budgets. I get that. So noted, Bert, on your comment there. Andrew, yes.
Well, can I address that? Can
Sure.
I address that? So I mean, yeah. Stan alluded to this earlier. These data sets, I mean, forget NREX, right? It can be NREX here, TomTom, Wejo, whoever. These are huge, huge data sets that you cannot really look at in an Excel spreadsheet. So it is very costly to manage these data sets and build these tools out. You know, we have 76 full-time software developers that are building out these tools all the time. You can always try to do this in-house on your own and, you know, not invest in us. That's okay. Just know that you're going to be starting from the ground up, and there's costs associated with that as well. You know, we are a nonprofit, and the cost is essentially our cost. There's no profit built into that. But you know, maybe we can talk later and see what your particular issues are, and if there's something else we can do for you.
All right, great. Thanks, Michael. That's good. All right, any more? Please keep the questions coming in the chat box if you'd like. You know, this is the opportunity to get them in there, and we'll get them answered. And know that there's also a Q&A. We will capture some of this and put it into a Q&A on our web link as well. So moving on, we're now going back to Stan returning, and he's going to talk a little more in depth about monitoring the COVID mobility impacts and what they were seeing at NREL. So Stan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
All right, take it away.
I had to say another note on cost. It seems like these data sources, we bring them in through operations and with a very limited budget, and then other business units throughout the DOT begin to build it in. And at some point in time, you have to bring the conversation up saying, what is the overall return on investment, so operations don't continually get hit with the bill without it being appropriately distributed across the agency. So we've been trying to initiate those discussions because I've seen business process impacts from both Maryland and North Carolina that indicate, hey, this has grown much more beyond the business unit that brought the data in the door. So very critical there. I have a few slides at the end. NREL has been involved in responses to COVID-19, specifically taking a look at mobility behavior, the impacts on mobility, and vice versa, the impacts mobility has on the spread. And just have a few select slides that touch on the points I brought up earlier. You've probably seen much of this material if you've surfed the web from various sources, but it kind of puts an exclamation point on the talk earlier about where we're headed. First of all, acknowledgement and appreciation. The NREL team, I get to present results from a host of people, all listed there. We've had great collaborations both with New York region, Chicago region, from another group, USDOT, NREX, TSA, IATA, various things like that. Funding was primarily all through the USDOE on this, but close coordination with the USDOT. Industry, travel data curation, validation, and analysis. this really pointed out the COVID issue. We talked about probe data being scalable. We talked about probe data being, not as accurate as sensor data, but one thing that wasn't brought up is time latency. One of the issues that involved, I fully acknowledge USDOT has the best volume data out there through the Highway Performance Monitoring System. However, to get to that level of accuracy requires a great deal of data checking and validation and so forth. And there's typically anywhere from a 12 to 18 month time lag before we can see volume data at a national scale. Realizing this, when the COVID hit and we knew things were going on, the U.S. Department of Transportation, in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Energy, sourced data for COVID mobility. This ended up being the travel trends portal. It reflected about 100 million trips a day, about a 10% sample across the U.S., and the impact on light duty, which tends to correlate with personal movement, medium duty more with local delivery, and heavy duty vehicles, of course, 18-wheelers, Class 8 trucks. It was the NREL traffic trends dashboard. We were able to make that available. I can't remember the number of seats across all federal agencies. It had some unique properties. There were some dashboards out there like this coming from private vendors, from Apple, maybe Google, SafeGraph, various others like that. One of the things in working directly with industry, we wanted to seasonally adjust it, not just show the relative volume pre-pandemic, but the relative volume also with respect to expectations for the month, because we all know that the summer months are busier travel months. So that was done. Hats off to USDOT for working closely with the vendor to make sure it was done to full expectations there. National scale, state and metro summaries were made available. 200 federal seat licenses, we distributed as much as possible, and I know the I-95 Corridor Coalition also made it available to their state agencies as well. Concurrently, NREL, through its research consortium across several labs, recognized the data and the value behind this. We, concurrently with that, were able to procure a multi-terabyte data set that reflected the origins and destinations of the travel behavior nationally for 2020, and we've been mining that ever since, and I got a few snapshots on that. And we distribute it through what we call our data systems LiveWire. This stresses even some of the DOE systems in terms of volume of data. It was an incredible activity, both understanding what is currently available through private industry in contrast, as well as in cooperation what's available through the jurisdiction. That put an exclamation point on that document I shared earlier. And also some of the struggles of grabbing that data and using it appropriately. These are a few examples similar. This is an example of the Trip Trends portal. If you log in, this shows all the United States compared to that of Ohio, compared to that of Columbus, reflecting the 3 cities. This is specifically showing light duty, I believe, passenger travel, and you can see the characteristic dip at the beginning of March. It stayed pretty low all the way into June. May and June started recovering, and by later in the year, we were back to about 80% of expected travel on our road system. So, this is also available for medium and heavy duty. Unfortunately, the scales aren't reflected the best on that, but if you could read the scales of the dip in medium and heavy duty, at worst got to about a 20% decline and then recovered slowly as well, reflecting that the underlying commerce of the U.S. continued quite strong. We are able to also plot this out by state, by the red, and if I'll try to highlight one thing in here, which is really cool. There, I got a thing. This red dot here, it's for Louisiana, and it happened during a specific week where Louisiana got hit by a tropical storm, and so you can begin to see the impact on, globally across the industry, some of the downturns with respect to roadway activity and correlate it to some of the things going on out there. Another thing we looked at, a lot of people ask us, and I think a lot more people, how do we know that this is accurate? How do we know this is reflective of what's going out there? We tried to do a few things. We tried to compare various industry data sources. We compared this data source with some of the stuff coming from University of Maryland, with streetlight data with Google, and they all pretty much fell in the same envelope. There were some biases in the data. Lower left-hand corner, we compared the trip length with some of the internal data that we had at the lab, and they were in good agreement. In the upper right, we looked at some of the data coming in across a couple of vendors and did some regression analysis, and it met expectations. It wasn't the greatest in the world, but it shows that they're reflecting the same trends. And the best and probably the most convincing is we compared trip length distributions of the origin destination with NHTS data and saw good agreement there. This was all internally to promote our own confidence in the data, as well as to share it externally of how reflective industry data is of what we know to be ground truth or reference data out there. Some of the other things that we did, we interacted with several of the COVID modeling epidemiologists out there. We are not by any means have that expertise, but these models that show disease spread also have an element of mobility, and many times, particularly the mobility aspects of once you get outside the city range, how did you transport in or transport out, were based on some simple assumptions. So we were able to take this national database and provide custom data sets that help tailor national travel specific to the region being modeled. This one happens to show Chicago, Cook County, and all the trips that were from 2 to 16 hours by vehicle out of that, just as a representative of what the strength in such data sets are. These data sets also expose some interesting changes, not only in how much travel we did, but when we took it. This is one of my favorite graphs put together by the team. I think it'll go if I click on it. Yep. Oh well, it's supposed to be animated. It's probably not animated here, but if you can pick out all the colors, you can see pre-COVID we had a distinct AM peak and a distinct PM peak. And then as you follow these charts down, they follow the months, January, February, March, April, May. We didn't get June on this chart. We need to bring it up to date a little bit. And as we've gone down in volume in the last month, we start to see volumes rebound in May, but the characteristic AM, PM peak has been severely changed, very almost non-existent AM peak by the time May rolled around, and a much broader, that May signature is much more indicative of what I would expect for a weekend. So you can see that there. If you take a look at the weekend travel patterns down here, they are mainly affected by amplitude, and their time distribution has not changed much. One of the more interesting things is taking a look at the multimodal impact. I call this my co-misery chart. We hear from a lot of folks, particularly in public transit, transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft, air, rail. This was by no means an automated. We grabbed information where it was available. The vehicle data was by far the easiest to come about. Bus data, Amtrak, TNC, we grabbed it where it was available. TNC data, particularly, this was reflecting Chicago because it's freely available there. And then we're able to reflect what's going on with Amtrak and other rail, and particularly the airline industry. Unfortunately, this is only up to date through about July. A lot of these data sources lag in time, maybe by a month or two. Some are just very difficult to get. We're working right now to bring this up to date as much as possible. The co-misery index, mainly because all these modes that down below are shared modes. Any shared mode out there that requires mixing of people in unfamiliar territory have been much slower to rebound than the private automobile, which is probably right around 80% of pre-COVID levels right now. This last one is really what I'm excited about. What this, before I showed you, here's stuff we would like to do, and this new data allowed us to do it. These next two examples, and then we'll bring it to a close, is things that, I'm not sure we could have even imagined or done without sources like this. The first one is community clustering. We had done something like this for an energy interest of about how to distribute or aggregate regions according to how they drive. Based on this data that's at the national scale, we did an early analysis. If what are the states and what are the boundaries where drivers tend to stay within. This is a clustering routine that was run against this national data set. And you can see there's Northwest, Midwest, Northeast, Southeast, South, and Southwest. And these percentages reflect relatively how much travelers tend to stay within that. That was early, probably earlier in the pandemic where states were discussing how do we have like policies and how should we partner in order to tackle this challenge. One of the more interesting analysis that was performed. We had week 1 maps. You can reflect it various things. We did automobile travel. You could also include airline travel as well to take a look at this and various trip lengths as well. What we weren't expecting, and we kind of dove into this data, this national OD data set, is understanding at the micro level, meaning at a census block or census, we ended up doing census block group level, what the changes were going about. And to understand this, I have to talk a little bit about the graph labeled A. We call it the NREL census block group. This is where my lab's headquarters is located. The solid lines represent pre-pandemic. The blue shows the people arriving at the census block group, and you can see in the AM peak period, a lot of people arrived consistent with white-collar lab activity, and very few arrived throughout the day afterwards. The solid yellow line are the departures, and you can see people departing from this area. There is a little residential near the lab, so there is a little AM peak. There's a lunch peak there, and then for the most part, it's people leaving from the lab at the end. We have about 2,000 employed there. And then you see the dotted lines, and this is during the pandemic. Very much muted, no distinct AM, PM peak, but kind of a bulge throughout the day. We took this a step further, and we integrated it, saying, show the number of people on site. So we took the arrivals minus the departures throughout the day, and pre-COVID, we have this nice peak, people showing at the lab, and at the end of the day, they depart. And then during the COVID, much more muted effect. A few people going to the lab and some activity from the residential area. And this kind of popped off the graph to us saying, wow, we can use this to automatically assess spatial areas at the census block group level nationwide if we wanted to. We ran it for some other areas and got some feedback. For residential areas, you can see the change. Green is the before, a lot of people leaving and coming in the day. The red in residential areas, a lot more people working from home or sticking around the home, a big gap there. For information-related jobs, very much like the one I showed you for NREL. Let me get the map here. No, I turned it off. The green is the before, a lot of people going to work. The red for information-related jobs, staying at home. For recreation, the opposite. Before COVID hit, we all stayed home. After COVID hit, a big spike in activity. Lastly, healthcare, very little change. They constantly treat the sick, and then they had plenty of people to treat during the COVID time, and so the healthcare areas really stuck out as not being impacted that much. But the power in doing this is these can all be auto-generated based on mobility behavior data that is now available in mass. Not easy to manipulate, but we can get there. This is a scatter plot over here, taking a look. If you take relative change in person hours at a place and plot it by correlation pre and post-COVID, things start popping out. Everything light colored is all pretty much the same. This is retail here, this is residential, so forth and so on. And we looked at it for Louisville, Kentucky versus Des Moines, Iowa. We're looking for contrast. Louisville has probably the least propensity for work from home based on the industry mix type, or Des Moines, Iowa has one of the highest propensities for work from home. And then we can begin to compare these charts for residential, for mixed business, so forth and so on. It's just a new perspective that we've never had the luxury of analyzing and digesting data at this scale and with these methods, and we hope to move those forward. I hope that gives you a flavor. I hope it points towards what some of these new data sources may bring to the transportation scene as we move forward across planning, operations, and management. But that is the end of the material I wanted to share, and I'll turn it back over to Denise.
Thanks, Dan. That was great. I feel like I'm getting data out of a fire hose. It was good, all good stuff. I think we're very blessed to have two of the foremost, I think, transportation experts in the country on one webinar at the same time. So thank you for your time. There are a couple questions in the chat box. I think, Michael, a couple of them are really quick. I think that Harun wanted to know if the Trip Trends portal is available to everyone, and is the lowest geographic unit is at MPO boundaries. Can you answer that real quick? And, actually, Amina just wanted to know, what is IRX? Is that an adjective? Michael?
IRX, was that for me? I don't remember having IRX in my presentation.
No, she said, I want to know what the adjusted index is. Sorry, Mina. It was in Stan's graph. Wrong guy.
Oh, yeah, that portal had two ways to measure the travel. One is I'll call it absolute, just compare the number of trips made to what we observed pre-COVID, and then there was adjusted, or what we should say seasonally adjusted, saying, okay, that may fool us because, you know, once summertime's hit, naturally we do a lot more travel. So there's two measures there. One is just an absolute measure to January and February, and the other is taking into account seasonal adjustments that we would expect to see.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Victor Chung has a question about what does it mean when the dynamic population numbers go below 0? Is that for Stan?
Yeah, excellent question that threw me for the first time. Normally when we look at let's say a place that attracts trips like a business center or a school, the population goes up during the day and then returns back down to 0. For those that go negative, they're sources of travelers, particularly residential. They're at their residence, and when it goes negative, that means they're departing their residence, going somewhere else, and then returning at the end of the day.
And Stan, I think Ira had one last question about the recreation trips. Are recreation trips more or less during COVID? He had a hard time with the graph. Can you explain that better to him?
What we saw, it means it was much greater. Just anecdotal information, there's a lot of hiking trails around where I live, and when I go out and take a hike, I've never seen as many people on these hiking trails as I've seen the last few months. So that's reflected in the data as well. Just by tracking trips, we were able to isolate the census block groups that represent recreation, and sure enough, it just screamed out the incredible increase of activity that such spatial areas have seen.
Okay. All right. While I see someone else is typing, but before I think we're at that point in time now where we're just doing some questions and some wrap up, or do you have more, Stan, here with the National Teleworking Analysis? Is that you?
Yeah, no, that's just some extra slides I didn't present. Save it for another day. That should have been deleted. So.
Okay. All right. So very quickly before we get off the phone, I'm seeing the need to talk about the coalition's marketplace and its data sharing concept from some of the comments and discussions we've had here. I'm going to list off a couple of states. Please listen carefully. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. If you are an agency within any of those states, because those are states that buy probe data as an all-in state procurement, the way the data sharing in the marketplace works is you are eligible through a data use agreement to have access to the RIDIS platform, to take a look at the PDA suite with some of the data. You need to sign a form. The information is either on our website or you can email me directly. But I think if you're particularly from a planning organization on the call, or a commission, or a city, and you're looking at this stuff going, wow, I wish I could get access to this. If you're in those states, yes, you can, and it's an ability to get in there. So send me an email or to send me or send Michael an email, and we can get you set up with an account to take a look at this stuff. I think it's a piece of information that is missing. We don't always communicate that well, but the fact that the data sharing agreement in the marketplace allows you to do that. Okay? So please let me know if there are any questions about that. It says here, back to Stan. Haroon, the census block group level data analysis, is that available from any analytics platform?
No, that is not. Yes, this is something, you know, much of the material I showed was stuff that you know we anticipated doing. That census block analysis and the change was something that was, should I say, discovered, invented, whatever. You know, could we do this with the data? And we were so pleased that it was possible. We shared the results with the data provider, with NREL, and are now chatting about, you know, how do we move this forward more systematically into some type of analytics platform, and like to pick that up as well with the coalition. The power in that data set and what it allows you to see is quite incredible.
Thanks, Dan. Matt Glasser has put some information in the box for anybody from Georgia. There are some other typing, group typing. Heron says, thank you, very impressive. That's great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think we're about right up. We have a couple more minutes, but I think we're right at the end of the conversation. Any other additional thoughts, Michael or Stan? Thank you for spending the time with us. You do amazing work, but any other thoughts before we head out? No?
None here.
Okay. And then as you can see on the site, the last slide, the meeting information, the presentation will be posted to the Eastern Transportation Coalition website. Okay, and you get a link. If you are not sure that you're registered, if somebody forwarded you an invite and you don't think you're on the list, then send us an email so that we can get you on the list so that you can get these presentations. My information is right on the screen right now. Please feel free to send it to me or to Michael or to Stan. With that being said, thank you for your time. Guys, thank you. It was a great webinar. Wow, great stuff. And may you all have a safe, happy, and healthy holiday. All right? Bye now.
Thanks, Denise. Bye.